Hello and welcome to the Drucker TV Book Corner, where we hear from authors shaping management thinking today. My name is Jyoti Guptara, and I'm the author of Business Storytelling from Hype to Hack. Joining me now is Ginni Rometty, the former chairman, president, and CEO of IBM. She became CEO of IBM in 2012 and retired from the company end of 2020. Ginni was named Fortune's #1 most powerful woman 3 years in a row. And it's a real honor to have her with us today. At the Drucker Forum, our theme this year is creative resilience, leading in an age of discontinuity. And I can't think of a better person to talk with than Ginni Rometty, who, after all, reinvented more than 50% of IBM's huge portfolio, building a $25 billion hybrid cloud business, and establishing IBM's leadership in fields such as artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and blockchain. Now, Ginni is the co-chair of OneTen, an organization that unites major US companies to upscale, hire, and promote 1 million Black Americans over the next 10 years into family-sustaining jobs. Earlier this year, Ginni published her memoir, Good Power, Leading Positive Change in Our Lives, Work, and World, out with Harvard Business Review Press. It's full of practical leadership lessons and big ideas on how we can all drive meaningful change. Ginni, welcome and thank you for joining us on Drucker TV.
My pleasure, Jyoti. Thank you very much. Thanks for the kind introduction.
Well, thank you for being with us. I really enjoyed your book, and I'm excited to discuss it with you. I wanted to start with the title, Good Power. A lot of people these days are suspicious of power. So what do you mean by good power?
Yeah, well, you are correct. And that's a little bit of the reason behind why we ended up naming it Good Power, in that I would talk to many, particularly young people, and I would say, well, would you like to be powerful? And they'd say, no, not really. And I said, what would you like to do? They like to work on big problems. I said, well, ironically, you need power for that. But what became clear to me, just looking back and from so many people I'd learned from in my own journey, that it is really possible to do hard things, but do them in a positive way. And I think right now there's so much negative connotation around power. I really wanted to get that message out to don't give up on hard problems, but do them in a positive way. And to me, positive means embrace tension and division, but then unite it. It means be respectful. It means celebrate progress. And I wanted this message to go out that, people, their power starts as an individual and it grows over time. And you don't actually realize that. And I really came to believe that when you have nothing, you have power, actually. So that's the story behind it. It's the idea that do something hard, but do it in a positive way.
Well, we certainly need to hear that message. So thank you for being bold and coming up with that title. Now, one of the 5 principles that you share in the book is being in service of other people. What would you say is the difference between good power and servant leadership?
Yeah, that is a good question, and one that I contemplated as I was writing. And I have to say, Jyoti, you called it a memoir. It's a memoir with purpose. So I don't want anyone to feel they're going to have to read every little detail of my life. It's more the mistakes and the stories, and you're a storyteller, so the learnings that in retrospect, in revisionist history, I look at this and I say, I hope someone can learn from. So to your point, there's a middle section that talks about the power of us when we all start to care, not just about ourselves, but whether it's a family, a work unit, eventually a company, et cetera, that you care about other people. And I said, now as I look back, I could see 5 principles of that kind of leadership. You mentioned be in service of something. And I really want to communicate how different that is than serving something first. And then to your point about servant leadership, to me, servant leadership, it's necessary but not sufficient to be in service of someone. So it's a piece of it. But really the main point that I have is I would call it a silver thread through the book, is trying to convey that it's not just what you believe about power, but how you do it is what matters. And to me, that's the difference of servant leadership. Yes, servant leadership is putting employees and others and being behind them. But then how you do that is what I really try to get at the essence of in the book.
And I certainly think you've achieved. I really like how you have these points, which we sometimes talk about in business, but they can stay quite abstract. And having
Yeah.
your personal stories and anecdotes really helps bring those to life. Which leads me to my next question, Ginny. Your memoir is highly personal, and I believe that's a lot of the value in it. Um, I believe you read the audiobook yourself because it is your story. Um, you write about how your father walked out on your young family and how you grew up in financial difficulties, along with many other personal episodes. Now, people often tell me, because I'm a business storytelling advisor, they tell me that in a business context, they're hesitant to talk about themselves. So, what is the point or the place, do you think, in telling personal stories in business, maybe before other people have climbed to as influential as a position as you have held?
Yeah, I'd be interested in your view on this too, Jody. I mean, this is what you do for a living and a profession, right? But I came into it in a different way. And what I've come to believe that being vulnerable and sharing your lessons, it's probably one of the most powerful change tools that a leader has. So when I look back, I wish I did it earlier because I spent a good portion of my life not talking about those things. And particularly being a woman in tech, people are like, no, 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 do not look at me as a woman. Look at me just as what my accomplishments are. So you would really, I stayed away from that for so long. But as time went on, and you say as you get more comfortable, but what I recognized is that that is how people learn. If you're vulnerable and you share that, it's not only how they learn, it is really what enlists followership. And so as I went to write the book, my first round, I actually rewritten this book 3 times. My first round on it was very academic. You know, you said we talk about these things in abstract. And I had some people looking like, oh, so boring. And they're like, you have to tell these personal, like, why do you believe these? Not just what you believe. Why? What has happened to you that you believe these things? And that led me down this memoir with purpose path. And, you know, you mentioned I do start the book in a very personal spot about my father abandoning our family with no money and no home. And, you know, the biggest lesson I learned out of that is my mother, she pulls us out of welfare and financial aid, and she single-handedly does that with no education. And she never said it, but taught me that don't let someone else define you. My father would not define her as a failure. She was going to change this for my brothers and sisters and I. And that is to me was one of the most powerful lessons because I think this idea that only you define who you are, and it's true for a person, a company, a country. I would have to recognize that with IBM. If I didn't define who it was, others were going to do that. And so I think for everybody, it's worth thinking about because so much of what happens in your personal life or just your personal impacts who you are professionally. So I've become a complete 360 on this in that, and I did become more vulnerable as my tenure went on, obviously, but I wish I had done it earlier for the reasons I said. It's a change tool and it does elicit followership.
Well, thank you for being vulnerable. And I think what your mother was doing was exemplifying a writing maxim, which is show, don't tell. It can often be
Yeah.
a lot more important to show rather than tell. Which leads me to writing. You mentioned that you rewrote this book multiple times, and there's an episode early on of how you got into university despite less than stellar SAT scores because you wrote such a good essay. And here at the Drucker Forum, we have the Drucker Challenge International Essay Contest, which I also serve a judge as. So I'm curious, and all of our future Drucker Challenge writers will be curious to hear what does Ginni Rometty say about why is writing such an important skill, and is it still in the era of ChatGPT?
Oh, I actually think in the era of Chat GPT, what I think it will bring back, I hope, and I hope the most profound impact on education is that it teaches people critical thinking again. Because so much of what's evolved or what people write, it's facts. And that's different than critical thinking. And I think one of the most important things I learned in school was, you know, why? how, not just the what of something. And I can remember in math, I hated memorizing the answer to something. I always wanted to be able to derive it again, like figure out why. And so I actually think maybe while people say, oh, chat's going to write this for me. I mean, we've all had our experiences. It can undo some writer's block for you, but the point isn't, it will change how people teach. I was doing a session, Jyoti, with Adam Grant, and he said, I'll probably have to have people write more in the classroom. On the other hand, I think I remember him saying, but Shakespeare didn't write what he wrote in 4 minutes. So there's a downside to that. And so we'll go through this learning period, but I hope what comes out the other end. I do think writing's important because it clarifies your thinking. And I hope that what happens is people use that for input, testing ideas, broadening their thought, but that it makes them like a really great critical thinker, not someone who just spews facts.
You heard it, folks, from Ginni Rometty herself. Writing will remain a critical skill. And Ginni, before you were a senior manager, you did intentionally work to become a compelling communicator. What would you say to someone who thinks they don't have time to develop this skill? Maybe one of the many senior executives who are right-brained, analytical types. What does communication have to do with power, specifically good power?
Yeah, this is so to me, communication, while some people will call that a soft skill, I consider it essential. And I actually, Jyoti, I learned that by watching who I thought were some of the greatest leaders. I worked for Lou Gerstner for quite a long time. I thought he was an unbelievable communicator. And because communication is so much about getting people to move from one reality to another reality. And one of the principles in the book is, in addition to being in service of something, if you want to do something hard, the next thing you got to do is build belief for people, meaning get them to go from something they don't necessarily believe in today and want to go voluntarily, not be compelled, not be told. And that's like a never ending journey. And that's communication. And I think so many people feel what you said, that communication is an art. You're born with it. You're good at it. But I came to learn it was a science. And so simplifying communication is more difficult. And I was not a great communicator when I started. In the process of writing the book, don't ask me why I kept some boxes full of things like my appraisals and, from work and my report cards. And it says like, oh, you're a horrible presenter. You got to work on this. You're telling them everything. Or if you don't enjoy it, your audience won't. And so it starts then. But I was so determined to fix that. And over time, I'm going to forget. Is this Abraham Lincoln? You're going to correct me who wrote this, that if I'd have written you a shorter letter, I'd have written you a shorter letter if I had more time. So my point is, it would take me down a path of when I studied the best communicators that people could remember and like feel what they said, speak to their head, their heart. They were very simple and they would speak often in 3 sections. There's lots of stories behind why speaking in 3s is a good thing. So obviously the book's in 3 parts. This will stay with me forever. But really simplifying the message so that my audience is easy to listen. They find it easy to listen. They can remember. It's not so I tell you everything. That is not the point. And so I felt very strongly that any great leader needs to study to become a great communicator. Now, I will marry that with one last point. I also believe very strongly, and it was Maya Angelou who said, time may pass, I'll paraphrase, you won't remember exactly what I said, but you will remember how I made you feel. That to me is equally important, right? In that whole communication piece.
Well, it's just as well you kept all of those old trinkets and memorabilia. Talking of skills, you now lead OneTen, this organization that's helping redefine what companies are looking for when they hire or promote people. This is a power dynamic, isn't it? Especially at large companies, this practice of mandating a college degree for entry-level positions. And I'm happy that you mentioned apprenticeships, especially my country of residence, Switzerland, as a role model, and how many of our CEOs started off as apprentices themselves, making it a respectable entry into a profession here. How did you come to realize that maybe a degree was an unnecessary barrier to entry to work for a company like IBM?
Yes. So let me give you sort of a a very short version of that journey. I mentioned my mom and never having had a education past high school. In fact, my grandma, my great grandma all suffered tragedies. But when my mom needed to get us and desperately wanted us off of things like food stamps and welfare, she took a little bit of education at a community college, got a little better job, a little more, little better job. And at an early age, I would assimilate something that I would now phrase, I think, in equations as an engineer, that access and aptitude are not equal. My mom actually was smart. She had a lot of aptitude, but she had zero access, right? So that thought that God spreads one equally, not so much the other one around the world. A lot of aptitude, not necessarily access. Then time would go on. And I personally would see that in my mom and didn't realize it. I'd apprenticed so many times myself. Okay, so that's in my mind. When I would become CEO, it would be, you said 2012, cyber's just becoming a big thing. Businesses, you got to hire people. I will shorten what's turned out to be a 20-year journey for me, but it would be serendipity that a corporate social responsibility program working with a high school and community college, a one-off, we would hire some people and they were able to do the job. And then I'd say, why didn't we hire more? And they'd say, well, they don't have college degrees. I'd say, okay, but they're doing the work and they're actually performing better than some of our regular employees. And I would learn, you know this already, 65% of Americans, actually all developed countries, do not have a college degree. I would learn 80% of Black Americans do not have a college degree. And I would say, okay, actually the pool I'm looking at that's performing so well, by the way, in America was 90% Black and Hispanic. So it was even like an untapped pool of diverse talent. And then we really measured it over time because I had to prove to people I wasn't dumbing down the workforce. And sure enough, higher retention, higher loyalty, performed equal or better than the degreed employees after about 1 year, a little bit of lag time, and 75% went off and got their degrees and have 3 PhDs over a long period. And so this, I would start to then do this in 30 countries in the world, and it would teach me that where you start, like my mom, should not determine where you end. These folks just did not have access. They had aptitude. And this idea that hire for a skill, not just a degree. Then I'd look at I said, well, okay, we didn't hire them because 100% of our jobs required a degree, a PhD or a college degree. Today, after a 5-year journey, only 50% of our jobs require that to get started. Doesn't mean you may not have to get one and I'm vice chair of a university. I am not against a college degree, but I've come to believe very strongly that if you believe in democracy, people have to believe there's a better way forward and for their children and their future, and they have to make a good living that could support a family. This is a systemic barrier over credentialing. And so it was a systemic barrier to that. It was a systemic barrier to good talent, to diverse talent. I mean, so that's, now you mentioned OneTen. It's just one of the underrepresented groups we're focusing on, but all the barriers are lifting it for any underrepresented group and getting all companies, not just in the US, global, relook at your credentials. And that's just your starting point, because what you're really saying to people is you want a skills first world is a talent strategy for all people. So whether that's, Delta Airlines removed it for pilots, and that doesn't mean your pilot doesn't know how to fly. He got it another way. And so that's just, to me, it's the essence, I think, of giving people hope for the future. So skills first brought me there, from my mom to my time as a CEO to then my work now, which was on the heels of the murder of George Floyd, which, back to an equation, I felt economic opportunity is the best equalizer for racism and about anything. So this is getting people good jobs.
Getting
And
in
apprenticeships is a
another
great
way.
pathway. Apprenticeships is a great pathway. I wish, Germany, Switzerland, they've got like 19 times more apprenticeships in the United States. It's crazy. So it's a great pathway.
This resonates with me personally, Ginny, because I left school when I was 15 years old
I
to
know,
become
I
a full.
saw that.
Yeah, so I published my first book when I was 17, made a decent living as a writer and a speaker for several years. But then, of course, I ran into trouble and had a very hard time getting a job, or a decent job. And despite having had a lot of experience, a lot of skills, I would say. And I remember there was this funny moment because an insurance company posted about an entry level job that sounded like I was a perfect fit for in terms of my experience. But not a chance. I never made it even past the first round. But ironically, about 6 months later, this same company, a different division at the company, actually got in touch and asked me if I would train their middle management. So I wasn't qualified for an entry level job, but apparently I was qualified to train their managers. Now, that was several years ago. What do you think has changed over the last few years when it comes to companies' policies and attitudes around qualifications? What kind of traction have you been getting? And can you talk about some of the challenges?
Yeah, look, first off, we are getting traction. I now can think of it as a movement, and I only use it as an example in the book of the power of us. When you start to transition from, I've done something for my company, myself, but actually, these really tough problems, you can break them in pieces and do it for society. And this is one of them. And now with almost 100 companies signed up, all going through this and re-credentialing their work. And even just in our Black community, we've done in the last 2 years, maybe 120,000 people hired. So not a small number yet. I'm marching on the way. But I have just so many stories of people starting to move that over-credentialing. Generally speaking, these big companies in our country, 85% require college degrees in their jobs for family-sustaining jobs. I've seen that now tick down several points. And the government has taken it off of it as a requirement. So we're making progress. And I think part of it's driven by low unemployment in that, you need people. So you've got to broaden the pool out there. But the other thing is that just this recognition that, and again, don't go into this unless you authentically believe a diverse workforce is a better workforce, because that's really what you get out of this at the end of the day.
This year's theme at the Drucker Forum is creative resilience. You were just saying if you believe diversity is actually going to give you an edge. And I think our theme this year is such a great fit for your book, Good Power. At times, you faced incredible pressure and there were unbelievably high stakes. I'm thinking of the PwC consulting merger in 2002, where you had to integrate tens of thousands of consultants, merged these two completely different cultures. And it easily could have been a complete failure. And then, of course, as CEO, whether it was incredible responsibility or critical media headlines, Ginny, what kept you going personally through tough or difficult times?
That's a great question, because for all the examples you cited, and I would lead IBM through its most tumultuous change, and so that isn't easy. And it's enough that when I think of how to do hard things, it's one of the 5 principles is about resilience. And so, as you say, it's a good fit. And I came to believe that there were 2 things. And Jyoti, to what you said, I just use stories, and there are really practical tips of how. And the 2 things, though, have to do with attitude and relationships. And I'll make just a small comment on each. On attitude, what keeps you resilient? Of course, that's what you said. You have to have conviction about what you're doing, no doubt, right? And when a critical headline would be there, I tell my mom, just turn off the television. I'll tell you when to turn it back on. I know what I'm doing is right for the long run. But the other thing you would learn to do is love conflict. I think that's a different thought people don't think about. If you love conflict versus stew in conflict, you actually 9 times out of 10 are going to make progress, and you won't feel as stressed out of it. So I talk a lot about how to love conflict and how to resolve it, tension, how to love tension, as just one example. The other side, I said, is this idea of relationships and what do they have to do with resilience. I felt the broader my relationships, and they had to have been formed over years before, by the way. So I would and they're formed by what you give, not what you get. So early on as a youngster, I had a mentor say to me, hey, whenever someone asks you for help, you give it. And that just adds up over a lifetime. But what those different relationships did is they give you perspective. And when you're doing something hard, it's easy to get wed to one view or another view, or to dwell on the wrong things. And when you've got that, you'd be surprised how people show up at the right times, and they'll say, no, you're looking at that wrong. Or no, you shouldn't be concerned with that piece. Or, well, let me just offer you another way to look at that issue. And those 2 things, and it includes family, by the way. I talk a lot about my family. There are some people who say this book is a love letter to my husband. On bad days, I tell him I'm going to rip chapters out, but that point. And so to me, those were the 2 things of resilience, was that relationships for perspective and 4 or 5 different tips about your attitude, because you can control, everyone says that. The one thing you can control is your attitude about what happens. You can't control what happened. I can't control the circumstances when I became the leader, but I can control how I reacted to it.
Relationships matter, absolutely. You just mentioned that one of the many things that you did, part of this great change at IBM, was introducing leadership in fields like AI. And I can't let you go, Ginny. Maybe final question, but I do have
Yes.
to ask you, since your book is called Good Power, and certainly one of the major shifts in power is exponential technologies like AI, which could mean unprecedented centralization of control. When you consolidate bad power, it becomes worse power, as we know from history. Is this something you're concerned about? What does good power look like in the era of exponential technologies?
Yeah, I have been concerned about this a long time, Jody. In fact, one of those 5 principles is steward good tech. I can remember coining the word internally good tech in 2012, feeling that there was going to be this division between have nots, that who would benefit from technology, and a smaller and smaller number were going to be the have versus the have nots. I'll boil it down to this. And the reason it's in the book, because whether you build the technology or you use it, you have control over this. And that being good tech means, okay, fine, these technologies, then you manage their upside and their downside in parallel. In parallel. People do not do that today. I mean, social media didn't do it. We took all the up and now we have this downside. And so now our lesson learned should be in parallel. And to me, the biggest determinant of whether these technologies are going to be successful is if people trust them. That was my takeaway from a decade of working on AI, that if the person using it didn't think that that technology was there to make them better, not replace them. I mean, we can pick our goal here. I don't know, everyone keeps saying the goal is replacement. The goal should be augment, make better. That was a principle I'd written in 2013, that the goal of AI is to augment mankind, right? And so again, those of us that make it and use it, we have a lot of control. Yes, there are bad people out there, but we can do that. And so when you say now, that's, to me, all the focus should be on how to build trust. I was with a group of doctors last night speaking about this topic, because they say this new version of AI with generative AI, healthcare is the #1 industry. I'm like, this isn't about whether this is right or wrong. It's going to be whether you trust this technology. Can the answers be explained? Can you actually change how your work is done? Will it make you better? If that's all true and healthcare changes from the inside out, then I think we have a chance to have profound healthcare change with AI. So that's my advice would be, it is about trust at the end of the day. It's not going to be about the technology, and that all of us have that within our power to manage that. And I think, in Europe, you have regulation that's been proposed, which, if I sort of summarize it, the idea is you can't regulate the technology. You can try to slow a technology down, good luck, because the bad guy will keep going. But you can regulate its use. And so the more high risk the use of these technologies, so I'm going to make, important health decisions, then there should be liability. We didn't do that in the past. If that's matched, I think you'll find people companies governing themselves much better. But we'll have a rocky road between here and there. I mean, we're going to have an election here in the United States. We'll see the impact on that. And that will shape people's opinions in the short run.
Ginny, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your personal journey with us, as well as these valuable lessons. And I do want to encourage everybody to pick up Ginny's book, Good Power. That was Ginni Rometty, co-chair of OneTen and former CEO of IBM. The world needs a lot more good power, so we now know some lessons we can apply. That's it from me, Jyoti Guptara. We'll be back with more from the authors writing the future of management. Until then, stay inspired and see you at the next Book Corner.